Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you all for coming. And there's going to be people trickling in for the next minute or two. So whilst that's happening, I should start straight away by saying we're recording this, and that's for the purposes of being able to make sure we can follow up with anything that people may have said or requested. And we're going to get a transcription as well. There's a few slides from myself. I haven't asked the speakers whether they'll be able to make the slides available after the event, but I'm fairly sure that that should be okay. So I can follow up and make sure that the any presentations are sent out to all the attendees. And I appreciate everybody coming today. I appreciate those people who have been so kind and generous as to give up their time to speak today, but also for you as attendees for also being generous with your time to come along. There's going to be several ways that you can engage with today's discussions, and you're very welcome to post thoughts into the chat, or you can ask can't even speak, specific questions by using the Q&A tab at the top of your screen. So if you look, it should be the second icon in your thing, and you should be able to put a question into the chat, and we will endeavour to get you an answer during the meeting itself. If for any reason we have to follow up afterwards, we will do so. We're also going to be using a Mentimeter to gauge some reactions and thoughts and opinions, and Kirsty is going to explain how that's going to work in more detail shortly. If you wish to speak, please can I ask that you use the raise your hand icon at the top of your screen, and I'll get to you in the order that people have raised their hands. We don't have a huge amount of time today, but there has been, I hope, sufficient time to build in for discussions after each of the presentations, and there's a slightly longer discussion session towards the end. But just to remind you, if we don't get you an answer today or during the meeting and you ask a specific question, we will endeavour to get you an answer as soon as is practical. How it's going to work, I've done my welcome, Foucher. Good morning, Ranova. I'm going to give a short presentation, a little bit of information about Climate Hebrides. I'm going to then hand over to our friend Alex Reid from the Scottish Rural and Islands Transport Community, and he's going to give a sort of policy overview about and his thinking into the situation around rural and island areas. Then Gemma Robinson from Hightrans is going to be talking about infrastructure and some of the challenges and positives that are coming out of the discussions that are happening at the moment. We're going to have an open discussion, and at that point, I'm going to be really keen for people to give their inputs, particularly if they have the use of an electric vehicle for their business or for their private lives, or they want to look at, they've had issues with chargers or whatever. So there's an opportunity for that. Then we're going to have a break. We're going to come back after that, and we're being joined by Ian McLeod from the Energy Savings Trust, who's going to be talking about a funding opportunity for colleagues to be able to install charge points in the non-public sector sites. Then after that, we've got some options from some technical companies who have some potential solutions for island communities. And we have Sean Johnston from NIAX and also Dave Pickles from Joro, and they're going to talk about some of the potential solutions that they have on offer. After that, we're going to have a sort of panel discussion on how we can build local EV capacity in the community. Finally, there'll be a sort of also penultimate session. There'll be a collaborative planning session. We're going to ask for your priorities that will help steer our work as the Climate Hub. And then finally, a closing remarks. And if we manage to get finished earlier, yay! And I'll endeavour to make sure that we do finish on time regardless. So I'm going to just share my screen for a second, and I'm going to give you a quick presentation about Climate Hebrides, and then Kirsty will then tell you, or unless Kirsty, you want to go first, do you want to tell people about Mentimeter before I go into my thing?
No, go ahead, Brian. I'll do it after.
Okay, thank you. So I just very quickly going to just bang through a little bit about Climate Hebrides and the Climate Hub, who we are, what we do, and why we're doing it. And there's a lovely picture there of the lovely Joan and Sarah an event which we've run. Um, I ask this question at every event. Have you been affected by climate change? And, you know, if I ask people to record what their thoughts are on that, some people sort of go, well, I don't think so, perhaps. And then about 10 minutes later, when they see other people's reactions, they all go, oh, actually, yes. And in an island context, I suspect we all probably have, and I'll explain why imminently. One of the things that we're really keen on, and in the context of electric vehicles and charging facilities, we have to consider about where we site things, how we get power to those areas, the impacts of things like storm surges, potentially power lines going down, the options for things like off-grid charging. And Ian from Energy Savings Trust is going to be talking about his fund, and there is potential there for up to £300,000 or thereabouts to consider battery storage and other things like that. So it's an important thing to consider. We have an opportunity for people to pin their thoughts on climate change, whether they've seen a threat from climate change or an opportunity for adaptation, onto the map. And that's outerhebrides.communitymaps.org.uk. And perhaps Sarah can put that into the chat for people so that they can have a look in their own time later on. The Climate Hub, here's a lovely picture. We had a very nice visit from the First Minister of Scotland. We came to see the hub, and we had 40 of our hub members come along, and some of whom are on the call today. And it was a great opportunity to put our thoughts and concerns directly to the First Minister. And he was really appreciative of the efforts of colleagues in the Western Isles to take action on climate change. So what is the hub? We're a membership organisation. We have 297 members from Battersea up to Lewis. We've even got St Kilda as a member, and that's because the Scottish National Trust, who look after St Kilda, are members of the Climate Hub, and they've recently had a terrible landslide, which some of you may have heard about in the media. So these things, and like as Harris has had landslides, for example, so these things do happen. We have to take into account that. We offer training, support, funding. We have an Ideas into Action fund where we can fund projects, and I'm seeing Keith from the Wee Studio on the call, who recently, hello Keith, had a brilliant solar powered gig at his recording studios. And he's also done work using virtual reality and being able to look at teaching people at a distance using technology. And there's some incredible work that's going on out there in the community, and we've been very keen to support as much action as possible. We have our annual conference, OCOP, and we also do things like this, an OCOP communities event, where we convene and bring people together and share ideas, discuss, try and find solutions. OCOP 2, our main conference recently, had 150 participants involved, either in person or joining us through the professional live streaming. Again, thankfully or gratefully live streamed by the Wee Studio. So we try and make our events as open and as interactive and as accessible as possible. We also, and for the purposes of this discussion, are encouraging people to take up electric vehicles. And Sarah has been taking our electric vehicle out to communities where people have had a go, or if they're not insured on other people's vehicles, they're able to at least sit in the passenger seat. But more importantly, they get to ask all the questions. Well, how do I charge it? Where do I charge it? Do the chargers work? And those are the discussions that happen all the time. So contextually, it's important to understand. If any of you are involved in the Western Isles, if you live and stay in the Western Isles and you work here, you're very welcome to join the Climate Hub. If you are based out with the islands but work within them, then you can also join the Outer Hebrides Climate Hub as well. And perhaps if some of you join today, then you may make us up to the 300 mark. So I'll stop sharing that now, and I'll hand over to Kirsty, who will be able to tell us about Mentimeter.
Thanks, Brian, and hi, good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see so many of you here. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about a tool we're going to be using today and will encourage you to use. We really want to make sure that everyone is able to participate fully in today's event, given that we've got such a short amount of time to discuss some of the issues. So there's the Q&A function. As Brian said, please feel free to post any questions in there. If we don't get to answer your question today, we will endeavour to answer your question at a later date and pick up with you. I've got everyone's email addresses anyway from registering for this event, so I can get in touch with you after if we don't get to it today. There's also the chat function on Teams, so feel free to post any comments or thoughts in the chat function as well, and we will try and get to that in a similar way. But today we're just going to be using another website called Mentimeter. So I've just posted the link in the chat just now. So if you click that link and open it, it's basically a slide deck of different slides throughout the day, and it'll change as and when we get to different sections of today's summit. So just now when you click it, the first thing that should come up is a slide saying what comes to mind when you think about EVs in the island. So it would be great if you could just fill that in a couple of words, and we'll make a little word cloud with this and then show that to everyone afterwards. And you can see everyone else's responses in live time on Mentimeter as well. So everyone will be able to see what everyone else is saying. Throughout the day, we've got a couple of questions scheduled via Mentimeter. So I'll just keep posting the link in the chat. And if you can just keep an eye on the chat and go back to it and just remember to fill that in, that would be really helpful. Just because we're collecting people's opinions and data, obviously, regarding EV infrastructure in the islands, because we just want to make sure that everyone's thoughts and concerns are factored into any future plans or strategies we have on EV infrastructure. So yeah, so if you could take a moment to just fill that in just now, that would be great. I see quite a few of you are already doing that, so that's good. Excellent. Great stuff.
Whilst people are doing that, Kirsty, please can I ask that are all the speakers able to share their screens?
They should be able to.
Brilliant. In which case, whilst people are gathering their thoughts there, I'd like to very much welcome Alex Reid from the Scottish Rural and Islands Transport Community. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to share a screen. I do have a few slides, so just bear with me. And we'll hopefully pull up presentation. Just 2 ticks. Oh, wrong one there. Just a minute. Here we go. Right. Actually, just let me stop share at the moment. This is not going to quite work the way I hoped it would do. Right. Let's go to this one and see if we can do it this way. Share screen and present. Right. Now, can everybody see the slides? Please nod. Yep, thumbs up. Thank you. Brilliant. So thanks, and thanks, Brian, first of all, for inviting me to speak this morning, which I'm absolutely glad to do because this is a subject very close to my heart. Just by way of a quick introduction, my name is Alex Reid. I'm a director of a community interest company called the Scottish Rural and Islands Transport Community. Some of you may have come across us on your travels. We are a national social enterprise founded in 2019, and in really simple terms, we act as a voice helping Scotland's rural and island communities to tackle transport poverty, of which, of course, there is a significant amount of that. So just a little bit about our team. We're a very small team. None of us work on this as a full-time gig, so to speak. We'll do this very much on a part-time or voluntary basis. So Jenny Milne founded SRITC back in about 2019, and I joined Jenny in the journey around about the same time. And we also have a third director, Ali McEnroy, who's also a CEO of Technology Scotland, and we've got a small support team around about us that look after things like project management, social media, and so forth. Now, in terms of our vision and our mission, it's very much about trying to address those equality challenges that we have when it comes to transport in rural areas. And by transport, we're talking not just about EVs, we're talking about buses, we're talking about trains, we're talking about ferries, all the things that, of course, if you live in an island in particular, you've got very personal experiences with. So our mission since we started out is really to make sure that we can do the best job we can to build connections and to drive knowledge sharing across all of our members. Now, speaking of which, our members are very much kind of dispersed at a certain degree. Of course, a lot of them are based in Scotland, but we have actually built up an international community of stakeholders as well, as you can see from the map. And that really is just a recognition of the fact that irrespective of whether you live in the Hebrides or whether you live in the south of Scotland or whether you live in another part of the world, if rural is your world in terms of your day-to-day experience, then there are challenges that are quite similar. So what we've been able to do over recent years is build that community and really take advantage of a lot of the knowledge that can be exchanged from people who are living, working in these different parts of the world. And just a sort of final point in terms of how we've evolved. A lot of the work we've been done or have been doing since we've been founded has been grant funded, and it's manifested itself in the form of a range of different events and reports. So we run our own annual event called The Gathering. We did our first one in Inverness, and since then we've done further ones either in person or online. And we've also produced a number of reports that have found their way to Scottish Government. And those reports are very much centred around what we see as something that's been badly needed for a long while, and that's the development of what we call a Rural and Islands Mobility Plan. So it's a specific transport plan for our rural and island areas. So yes, it complements national transport plans, but it's also separate and more reflective of what the specific needs of our rural and island communities are. So that's just a bit of background. So let's get into the matter at hand today, which is very much about making public charging work for the Hebrides. Now, just before I give an overview, because my job today is really just to set the scene, provide a bit of a landscape in terms of where are we today from a national standpoint when it comes to the rollout of EV infrastructure, and also, of course, what are the particular challenges for rural and island areas and how might we be able to best tackle those challenges. But it's worthwhile reflecting on what I see has been something that is very important because particularly in our island areas, we can find charge points such as these ones that offer a great view, but aren't necessarily going to be particularly well used. So just to frame that particular picture, this was taken in Isle of Arran. That's where I'm from originally. That's where I grew up, still got family there. These were 2 charge points installed earlier this year. Were they installed in the right places? Well, possibly not, because they're outside the nearest village, and most of the people who are going to require access to EV charging are going to be those who are live in the island and more likely than not have their own off-road drives or driveways to charge their vehicles. So this tells its own little story, which I think is common in other rural parts and island parts of Scotland, is that chargers sometimes can end up in the wrong places, even if the underlying motivations are correct. So where are we today? And this is a big picture piece just to set the scene for everyone. And this really just speaks to what the Scottish Government has been doing since about 2011 in terms of the amount of investment it's put into the rollout of a public charging network across the country. So in the region of about £65 million has been spent. And as of last month, we're up to just over 7,300 public chargers. So there is a good news story around this, if you look at it at a very sort of macro level, in the sense that the Scottish Government has really been in the front foot since 2011 in trying to build out that infrastructure in order to incentivise and drive demand for charging through more people choosing to buy electric vehicles. But of course, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in the day, when you dig underneath the surface, we know that, again, particularly in rural areas and island areas, there are charge points that aren't working or aren't very well utilised either. So there's a bit of a mixed picture when you actually dig a little bit deeper. So where are we heading? And this is really important because the conversation today, I think, also is about what are the specific actions that need to be taken in the Hebrides to make sure that there's a public charging network that's fit for purpose in the long term. And how that's achieved is going to be different to how we've got to where we are today, because as I've just touched on, we got primarily to where we are today through the Scottish Government taking that leading hand and funding the rollout of EV chargers. That's not going to be quite the same or quite the extent as it will be moving forward. So numbers wise, the target is by 2030 to get to about 24,000 public charge points across the whole of Scotland. So just reflect on that for a second. We are, as of end of October, at about 7,300. So quite a significant way to go in more or less 4 years or thereabouts. So that's the kind of numbers piece. And also just worth reflecting on when you look at this slide, how that's going to be financed. What we're at the start of now is a transition from primarily public funding to primarily privately funded. And that's privately funded through private charge point operators coming in and either taking ownership of the existing public charge points that are there, and then also introducing new public charge points as well across all parts of the country. So this is quite a significant transition, and it also requires changes in how we think about how charge points are rolled out when the private sector is going to have more responsibility for installation, management and maintenance of them. Now, just to build on that a little bit further, ChargePlace Scotland, as I'm sure you'll be aware, really has been the platform and the programme that has driven out the public chargers in terms of how we've got to today. There's a migration process that's taking place right now and will continue into next year. And the idea behind that is that private sector charge point operators will come in and take ownership of those existing charge points. And that includes those that are in rural areas as well. Now, there might very well be, as part of this process, conversations that take place around which of those chargers are best placed to continue into the future, because some of those chargers will be older and they won't necessarily be compliant with the latest regulations and the related standards when it comes to things like contactless payments and it comes to things such as accessibility. So there will be a change in terms of the number and, of course, the location of where those existing charge points are, as we then move into the introduction of new charging infrastructure, and that has been stimulated through the £30 million that Transport Scotland are ploughing in to get us towards that 24,000. So that 30 million is spread across the whole of the UK. It's helping consortium of councils to work together to find a private partner, charge point operator, to then roll out those additional charge points in the locations where it's identified as being most needed. And then finally, also coming out of Transport Scotland, as you might be aware of again, is a fund that was announced back in early September, £4.5 million, and that's targeted specifically at rural and island communities, public-facing businesses who can apply to have a charger or chargers or even a small microgrid installed to help again drive demand for EV charging. So that's the public side of things. That's the money that's flowing forward at the moment to help transition to this new world where there is a higher degree of private ownership, or private operator ownership and maintenance. But here's the thing: we have what we call a trilemma, and that really gets down to three important points. How many chargers do we really need? Because the 24,000 that I touched on earlier, that's a target, but that can be influenced by the type of chargers, the technology that's deployed in particular locations. Should you put slow speed chargers in? Should you put higher speed chargers in? And also, of course, and very importantly for rural areas and island areas, is the geographic accessibility of those chargers as well. How close to each other should public charge points be to ensure that anyone who needs access to one can get access to one? Now, that's a big question because it will, of course, very much depend on each individual location and also have to take account of the percentage of EV drivers that have got access to their own driveway to charge their own vehicle. So this is why when we look at how things evolve moving forward, we have to be led by insight, we have to be led by data to make sure that the right charge points and the right type of charge points end up in the right places and they get utilised enough to make it worthwhile. Because the truth of the matter is, as we all know, we aren't going to get the same level of utilisation in certain rural and island areas as you are going to get in the centre of a city, for example. So, three key challenges for rural and island areas, as I see them. One is population and population dispersion. We're more spread out when we live in rural areas and in island areas, and that obviously affects demand for charging, so that must be taken account of. Second of all, we have the grid aspect of things as well, in terms of access to grid connections or lack of access to the right type of grid connections, particularly important for higher speed rapid chargers. So that is a potential constraint in terms of the ability to get the right chargers into the right place. And then thirdly, local suppliers. Today we know that where there are charge points that are faulty or need repaired and need some form of technician to look at them, that can be a challenge because those skills aren't necessarily on hand locally. Moving forward, one of the bigger conversations hopefully we'll have today is what can we do to stimulate a more localised supply chain and have people who are trained and on hand to look after and to repair charge points when they need to be repaired, so they're not lying faulty out of action for extended periods of time. So those are the challenges. I think in terms of looking at this kind of glass half full, what are the opportunities? And hopefully this will again come out through conversation today. And none of these are particularly controversial or new. One is this opportunity to look at greater levels of community ownership of assets, community ownership of EV charging. And that's already happening in different parts of the UK. So you might be aware that in Cumbria, there is an organisation called Charge My Place, who are community run. And they started because they needed to get charge points into rural areas. So there was a small group of volunteers took the bull by the horns and they started a community organisation and now successfully are rolling out charge points. So number one, community ownership is something that I think we do need to look at and investigate as an opportunity. Second of all is microgrids. If we have grid constraints, then how can we make sure that where it's appropriate, we can start to build out more microgrids so that we can, rather than depend on the grid, we can generate our own energy, store our own energy, and then use that to energise our electric vehicles, or indeed for electric vehicles to produce energy back in, transfer energy back into the microgrid as well through vehicle to grid charging. And then there is, as I've just touched on in the previous slide, the opportunity to localise supply chains. So when we think about the skills we're going to need, not just for EV chargers and for EVs, because EVs will need to be repaired and maintained as well, but also for the wider grid and the microgrid, what are the skills that are going to be needed in order to make sure that we don't have any issues and pain points about depending on skills coming in from further afield, having to be flown in or ferried in, and the issues that come with that. So that's my final slide. Hopefully that kind of sets the scene for everyone. It is a very kind of big picture, Pit, and I'm sure we'll dive into this in a little bit more detail with the speakers that are coming up. If you do want to connect with us at SRITC, then you can scan the QR code there. We have a growing community and we're actively encourage anyone who is interested in not just EVs, but the future of rural transport more generally to join our community. We do regular virtual cafes, one a month, and we have a newsletter. So if you're not already part of our community, then yeah, check us out. Details on the slide there. I'm happy to share my email address afterwards as well. And thanks, Brian, again for the opportunity, and I'll hand back over to you and stop sharing.
Alex, thank you. I really thank you again for being so generous with your time and thinking. I think what we'll do is we'll go straight into Gemma Robertson from Hightrans, and then we'll open it to the floor for a discussion before we have a break at 11 o'clock. And but in the meantime, please do pop questions in the Q&A, everyone, if you want to get an answer. And please, if you're a speaker and you see a question and you think, oh, I know the answer to that, do feel free to jump in with a response. So Gemma Robinson from Hightrans, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Alex, for setting the scene so well. I'm Gemma Robinson. I'm the EV Infrastructure Project Manager at the Highlands and Islands Transport Partnership. And my role is to develop and deliver charging infrastructure strategy across the north and west of Scotland. I work with Argyll and Bute, Western Isles, Orkney Islands and Shetland Island councils to understand the common and unique island and rural challenges and deliver some of the Scottish Government's funding programme, the EV Infrastructure Fund, or EVIF, which Alex mentioned. Some of the main aims of that programme are to scale up infrastructure and attract private investment. We're working on the commercial model to attract private investment, and those ideas are taking shape to address the unique challenges and opportunities of the region. But the first thing we had to do was get ready to scale up because we weren't there yet. And that's what I'm going to talk through today or focus on. With ChargePlace Scotland ending, we've just appointed Scottish Power as our new charge point network operator for the region, who aligns with our fleet and energy aims and could grow with us. It's important to mention that they're not taking on the ownership of the chargers or setting the tariffs at the moment. That lies with the council for now. Could change in the future, but there's for the foreseeable future, that remains with the council. We're going to announce more about that partnership, how it affects customers in the coming weeks, and also let you know when that's due to happen. So I won't go into the details today, but we will have more information to share with you in the coming weeks. We then need to de-risk network operation by replacing approximately half the chargers for various reasons, and that could be contactless requirements, the 3G switch off, or just the age of some of the chargers. And we're also looking to add charging provision in Barrow and Tarbert, where there's obvious public charging gaps at the moment. Finally, we're trying to improve maintenance and move to a local maintenance model, which again, Alex has touched on, and I know I've spoken a lot to Brian about as well. So I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail today. To date, councils in this shared partnership have had very limited control of charge point repair schedules, updates to respond with, or alternative providers to contract the maintenance. We've had helpful anecdotal feedback from the public, but we needed statistical evidence of our operational challenges to be able to call for improvement. So earlier this year, Hightrans commissioned Full Circle Continuous Improvement to complete a maintenance deep dive of public chargers across the 4 councils. Through focused data analysis of 12 months of fault logs, contract research and stakeholder engagement, Full Circle Continuous Improvement were able to identify trends in historical faults. Not being able to initiate a charging session and requesting a remote start was the biggest customer challenge across the region. There can be multiple reasons for this: timing out from not going through the steps in time, intermittent charger communication, user error, etc. Interestingly, CPOs do not consider this as a fault, as it's not a technical issue. The biggest technical cause of charging challenges was poor charger communication from the comms being either down or intermittent. And again, CPOs do not consider this a fault either, because it's not a technical issue that they're responsible for. So we learned there's immediately a discrepancy in what the public understandably thinks is a fault because the charger's not working, and what the CPO thinks is a fault, and understanding who's responsible for those aspects of the charging service. All in all, critical areas of concern with the existing maintenance model were identified, including inadequate communication and escalation paths, delays in service and maintenance, inaccurate data and reporting, and lack of contractual accountability. The cumulative effect of these challenges is far-reaching, seriously impacting public perception, trust, and the broader transition to electric vehicles, particularly in rural and island communities, as you well know. The Maintenance Deep Dive report was used for three purposes: to better understand the features and processes of a back office system and inform our understanding of requirements for the procurement of a back office service, resulting in the appointment of Scottish Power. It's to be used as an action list to discuss immediate improvements with our current maintenance provider and to shape the development of our regional future maintenance model. I'll expand a little on those last 2 points now. Many of the quick wins from the Maintenance Deep Dive were to improve basic communication, establishing contacts for different aspects of service, setting up instant communication channels and shared document spaces between operational staff and teams, receiving multiple logins for and refresher training on dashboards, and increasing visibility, understanding and accountability, which should have an immediate positive effect on the ability to respond to faults and queries effectively. And I'll just mention that although that's fairly basic communication, the councils didn't have an option. They only had one provider they could use. So just to get these improvements this time was a good step forward. Organisational processes obviously take longer to review and are in progress. This includes documenting regular performance reviews, investigating the delays caused by maintenance payment processes, reviewing the classification of fault codes to capture the full spectrum of root causes, booking site visits and responding in the time stipulated in the service level agreement. That said, it's still clear a major shift is needed in the maintenance model, and we're working with the councils to develop procurement for this at the moment, as there is now more than one provider who can provide maintenance. We want to stipulate that we receive timely repair dates that we can pass on to the public, that fault updates are automated and flagged with the councils, that predefined charges or areas must be escalated immediately if they go out of service. And we're looking at enhancing digital communication for this scenario, looking at the Charge My Street project in Cumbria that Alex mentioned earlier. And finally, that the first and second responses are local. So the first and second maintenance responses are local to make them quicker, cheaper and better for the environment. This causes quite a lot of challenges with management resource, procurement and liability that have to be worked through. There's a lot of willingness to have local maintenance, but how that's actually worked through in reality, there are some sort of technical challenges with that in terms of like software codes that can be shared, in terms of who is responsible for monitoring that network. So that's all things that we're starting to work through. That's it from me today. Thank you for listening. We're keen to understand all perspectives, and thank you for your feedback and patience as we continue working on systemic improvements to the network.
Thank you, Gemma. That was terrific. And can I ask one question? You mentioned the report that you did into maintenance for electric vehicles, chargers, and I thought I've read that report, and it's a fantastic piece of work, and it really digs deep into the issues, and it's really a powerful piece of work. Is that available to be shared with, for example, people on the call today, or does it have commercial stuff in it that you can't really share it?
No, the original one I haven't made available to the public, just because the original report we then we then talked through the maintenance with the maintenance provider, and there were some inaccuracies in it. So what I shared with you was our progress report, and that is publicly available on the Hightrans website. I can't put it in the chat. Sorry, my chat function's not working, but it is available on the Hightrans website on the EVIF project page.
Brilliant. And we'll follow up and we'll see if we can find that link and put it into the chat ourselves. I've got a hand up here, so I'll hand over to Michael if you want to ask your question, and then I'll go into the chat and see if I can pull some of the questions out from there. Michael McDowell.
Hello, everyone. It's a bit of a question and also a bit of experience. I owned an electric vehicle for 5 years, and some of the issues I had have been spoken about. At one point, I had more than 6 apps on my phone. So that's 6 times you've got to put in your credit or debit card details and all personal stuff. I had the Charge Place Scotland app as well, and also the little card that had all the issues with the comms not working and the phone calls and all that sort of thing as well. And when you phone up, they say, well, it's not my responsibility, this, you'll need to phone someone else, and then you phone up and you get the same answer, so you're left in limbo. And twice in my life having the EV, I had to get towed to another charge place, because when you look in the app, it says the charge point's working, so you drive there with just enough miles, maybe 10%, and then you get there, it's not working, but the person on the other end of the phone won't help you. So I had to get towed twice to another charge point. At one point, I had to get towed 70 miles away to a charge point that was working. So big questions for me are, if you're going private with charge points, what margin are they making for profit? Is someone keeping control of that so it's not too expensive? Because we know for a fact at the moment, private ones are really expensive compared to charging at home. So what profit margin are they making? And the other question I would have is the infrastructure keeping ahead of the uptake in EVs? And who is looking at that? And I could tell you lots of horror stories, but I won't.
Yeah.
But I gave my car up because out of frustration of several different things, but mainly because charge point's not working. Getting to a charge point area and having to wait 45 minutes to an hour because it was that busy and people sitting there already waiting. And also some of the charge points just being too slow at charging.
I'm grateful, Michael, for your intervention, and I'll answer one of those questions. Oh, by the way, you had 5 apps. I have 15 on mine, but I drive from Stornoway to London to go and see my dad, and it's a wild west.
I've done that many a time, Brian.
So, anyway, but things are changing. I mean, the purpose of today is to consider those very issues that you've raised, Michael, to make sure that we can reflect on the numbers of people requiring chargers. And there is an ongoing increase. You can pop your hand down now, Michael. We're really looking into that, and what we want to get out of this is a mechanism to improve the numbers of chargers and the capacity to get them fixed sooner, and also understand really the direction of travel, including things like with the energy transition. You know, Alex mentioned microgrids and opportunities there. You know, we're having a major energy transition in the islands, and if we can't work out how to plug in a vehicle and charge it like we do our phones, then I kind of think we're falling down, aren't we? Rupert, please come in.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks to our previous speakers. I just had a quick question, which may lead to another for Gemma. You're talking about Hightrans covering the region, but it seems that you're only covering Charge Place Scotland and its successor. Does your planning of infrastructure include the private operators, of which there are a number other than Charge Scotland and its successors?
So Rupert, the programme I work for, the EV Infrastructure Fund, is for council-owned chargers. So that's why I am looking at the CPS network at the moment and what's happening with that. But obviously, as Hightrans ourselves, we're keeping an overview of what's happening across the charging network in general. And one thing I would say is that those lines are disappearing between public and private networks all the time. And I think that's a really good thing. in island and rural communities, because we need that pull together to make it work. But we are sort of directing people to, for example, I don't know both the speakers later, but for example, I know Joro have something they can put in place with private operators or workplaces. So we're trying to direct people to the right funds and the right information, but it's not necessarily something I do in my role at the moment.
Okay, yeah. That's
and
a
if
shame.
I-
It would be useful if Hightrans could take on the infrastructure planning more general, just so there is an oversight rather than lots of private companies putting them where they sort of think. But thank you for answering what you're up to. Just related to that and what you were saying about getting people to fix them in what to mainlanders seem to be remote locations. Of course, for those of us who live here, the islands are just home. They're not remote at all. And Zest, one of the independent infrastructure companies who has put them up both at my place and at on Uig and various other places in Scotland, they train local electricians and get them to come and fix it. So there's a local company that comes and sorts out mine if it breaks down, and that gets around lots of the trouble. So I'm surprised, or perhaps not surprised, that the government hasn't gone down that way. Could I just very quickly say something for what Alex was talking about? You mentioned 24,000 chargers is an aim, roughly speaking. We're currently at about 7 or 8. And that would work out, given the number of registered vehicles in Scotland, even just cars, at about 100 cars per charger. Does that sound about right in comparison with, say, petrol pumps, which is actually fewer, but of course it takes longer? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in, Brian. And I mean, it sounds about, I haven't done the maths, the arithmetic on that, but I mean, it sounds about right. I suppose we have to be kind of really cautious in terms of making any sort of direct comparisons between charging an EV and filling a petrol car up, because it's not necessarily the direct like-for-like comparison in terms of how, in terms of behaviours and so forth. I think the broader point we have here, just in terms of this kind of raw number of 24,000, is really comes down to, as I touched on in my slides, is about location. And just to your point, Rupert, about the private sector versus the public sector, I mean, I do believe, and I have said this directly to Transport Scotland, that there is a potential risk of lack of coordination when it comes to where these charge points end up. And let's just think about living in an island, for example, or living in any rural area for that matter, which are quite heavily dependent on tourists. I mean, I would argue that the private sector can play an important role in meeting quite a significant amount of that demand, not all of it, but a significant percentage of it, simply because there are many hospitality businesses, self-catering businesses and so forth, that can and probably should make charging available. And if they did so, that would mean that tourists who are using that accommodation can charge overnight. And guess what? That means that they would only really need to have access to slower charging. There wouldn't need to be such a rush and such a demand for higher speed charging. Yes, some of it would still be needed, but when we reflect on some of the grid constraints and challenges in putting that higher speed charging in place, then I would say that there is a strong argument for making sure the government is doing as much as it can do to incentivise, support, motivate those private sector businesses, hospitality businesses, in order to get a charger or chargers in place. And when you add that up and to include the locals, who many of which will have their own driveways and can charge from there, then that then leaves you with the remainder, which should then be managed or addressed through the public sector, through the councils, and the councils putting the right charger in the right place to meet the rest of the sort of destination-based charging. So that's the kind of big picture, I think, as we kind of see it. And I think it comes back to the government making sure that they don't take a completely hands-off approach around this coordination bit, because I do see that as a potential issue.
Thanks, Alex. So I can quickly say I agree with what you're saying about hospitality and other coming in and filling the gaps. And I would suggest that it ought to be a condition of planning permission for self-catering and hotels, etc., that they provide at least X charges per people who are licensed to stay there. just a suggestion, but
Yeah, and
thanks.
it sounds sensible. I think it's going to be fair to say that for any tourist who's looking at accommodation, much as we've done in the past, determining whether it offers Wi-Fi or not, I think moving forward it'll be a similar thing for EV charging. You'll kind of make your decisions. There's more and more people. It's not so much of an issue today, but as more people actually own an EV and drive an EV, then if they are travelling and looking for accommodation, then charging is something I think that they'll just make a decision around whether the property has it or doesn't have it.
I think it's a really important point. And we also have Sarah McLean on the call from Outer Hebrides Tourism, visit Outer Hebrides. And, you know, they have hundreds, if not thousands of members across the Western Isles who have the capacity to meet and greet people and to help remove some of the pressure on the public charging infrastructure. So that's a really important point. And that's partly why, again, we've convened this. Ian, how are you today? Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm Aaron McNeil and I'm based on the island of Barra. Thank you, Brian. I'm doing fine. Just interested in the chat and thank you for the presentations. I was wanting to ask Gemma and anyone else that might have an answer. How do you go about recommending to councils or others what would be a fair charging rate? I think Michael touched on that earlier on, rather than people running away making a lot of money. Not that I think there's a lot of money to be made, but how do you have a guidance to, for instance, for myself, I work for a local charity, and obviously we've got to cover our costs and hopefully make a small return. But even at that, with the price of electricity being what it is, it could be quite high. We've got the council, and I think it's through your own scheme, Gemma, coming down soon to put in another charging point beside our own charitable resource sought charging point. And there's a hint that we might need to charge the council rate, which might not necessarily cover our costs because our purse isn't as big as the council's. Sorry if that was a bit of a ramble, but
no, that's okay. I'm not sure the council purses are that big on EV charging, but we are looking at tariffs quite closely. Part of the EV infrastructure funding conditions were that every charger brought in a tariff, because effectively, if tariffs are too low in an area, it will prevent any commercial interest in that area. They can't compete with subsidised charging. But what we've had a lot of guidance from Transport Scotland and worked with consultancies on the tariffs to make sure that tariffs are covering the costs of chargers. And previously they weren't covering the cost of electricity, the cost of the charger itself, the cost of operating them. And I was actually just writing a response to Michael's earlier question, just to say that a Journey charger on its own can cost £30,000 to £60,000 to install, and that cost has to be recouped over the lifetime of that asset, and you have to build in enough to replace it in the future as well. So it is always more expensive than home charging. It's always meant to support home charging rather than be a replacement for it. It's not an easy one to solve at all. And I understand that there's always a balance, and it has to be affordable for people as well. Or if it's not used, there's no point putting it in at all. So it's a constant balance at the moment.
okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'll just pop in here if that's okay. It's a great discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your contributions. I just wanted to flag a couple of questions from the Q&A in the chat. Can I ask that the speakers have a wee look at the Q&A as well, because I think you should be able to type an answer. So if you don't get around to answering just now, it would be great to get your thoughts on that at a later point. But Rod's just asked, are there any government incentives for businesses with off-street parking to collaborate with community members who don't have off-street parking to share access to overnight charging tariffs? I don't know if anyone wants to take that question. Okay, maybe that's one that we can get back to you on, Rod, later on. There was also a question from Keith in the chat Hi Keith. At my studio in Ness, I have a roof full of solar panels and at least 4 parking spaces available for EV chargers for public use. What would you recommend for us to be able to afford buying and installing these chargers? Sean, do you want to go ahead?
Hi there, yes, g'day. So I thought I could just jump in here and I will touch this a little bit further on. So I'm Sean from Nix Energy and we are an OEM of chargers on the AC side. And I think what would be critical is when you have a site, especially on what we call a small business or micro CPO or what we have available on sites, depending on available infrastructure, so your current power supply, three-phase connectivity, what's available to power the chargers, you would have to make a distinction between what type that you'd need. So if you want DC or AC charging. I can definitely touch on this a little bit later as it's part of my presentation, and obviously we'll be talking about what the right solution and how to focus on. And I'm sure the installing partners, Jaro, can also add more leverage to that as well. But essentially, it is something that would need to be a fit for purpose and more than likely looking at an AC side. The reason being is your cost of the hardware and the overall operation of these chargers. You know, just as a general broad brush, an AC three-phase 22 kilowatt charger, you're talking small thousands of pounds, whereas the larger installations on the DC, you start heading towards the tens of thousands of pounds. So we can definitely touch points on that a little bit later as well.
Great, thank you so much, Sean. Ian.
Yeah, I was just I think that's one that you get the full details in my presentation after the break, I think. But basically that sounds like one that could be relevant for our Rural and Island Infrastructure Fund. So that's offering full funding for EV charging that is publicly accessible. So sounds like that's potentially one, Keith, for you to look into. Well, you'll hear more about it shortly, but I'll drop the link to the webpage in the chat.
Great stuff, thank you.
If I can pick up, I mean, Peter Fleming has put in, I've got three-phase power and parking in Kirkibost, and I'm interested in having charge points, especially if some funding was available to assist. Peter, you'll hear all about that after the break, and Ian will tell you about potential funding sources, and Sean and Dave will be able to tell you about some options. Rupert's already suggested another provider as well, and maybe he can put a link to that into the chat when we're having that session. I think, do we have any more questions in the chat that we've got? We can squeeze in one more, I think, before we break.
But Brian, just a quick one from Michael McGowan again. Is no one going to address the amount of apps that people would need to have if they're travelling distance? It's great for local stuff, but just to have one app. But you need just the one app or the one platform, because it's just so much hassle having all those. If you've got 15 apps and I had more than 6, maybe 10 even, it just doesn't work for some people.
Can I ask those people who have put their hands up, are you putting your hand up to answer that last question? I'll go to Gemma. Thank you.
Thank you again. Sorry, I was just replying to you, Michael, but the number of apps in England for accessing charging has come under a lot of criticism because of how much people have to do and how much they have to remember and go through at the charging stations. And one of the things people were really keen on was to keep that one access method across Charge Place Scotland when it ended. Unfortunately, that hasn't been able to happen. And we are going to end up with more access methods. What we're trying to do through the EVIF collaborations is keep that to a minimum. So, for example, in Argyll and Bute, Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland, those will be on Scottish Power, and we will let you know how to access that network in the coming weeks. And then across Highlands, Moray, Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City, they are with the EasyGo network. So there will be one access method that you could use for that. There's lots of methods, but you can choose one. So we are trying to keep it to a minimum, but there's no doubt that the number of apps and access methods is going to increase from what we're used to, because we're used to one and that worked really well. but unfortunately it just wasn't possible to keep it.
Thank you.
John, if you just come in very quickly, and Rod, if you want to say something, we need to go to a break and get back on. So very quick interventions.
I'll let Rod go first because I spoke earlier and then jumped on.
Oh, okay, thanks. So I found like the Charge Place Scotland, Swarco, eVote, whatever guys they're in, that has been quite strange because they have actually required 3 cards for them, which has been very weird. Sometimes it works for one person's card, it works in Tarbert, sometimes it doesn't. And I've ended up having to use whatever Freak card it was this month to help tourists get their charge because they're desperate to move away from the Fed or whatever it was. And like on the continent, these folk are used to having one card that works everywhere and a common standard. And I'm worried when you said it's Scottish Power that's going to be taking forward the charging infrastructure, there's another company. Is there something about UK and Scottish government infrastructure rollout and development that we are not allowed to do it as a community, as a government, as Scotland? Do we have to go to private providers for this?
I think
I guess that's
unless someone's got a direct answer there, Alex.
Mute. Sorry, I'm on mute, folks. No, only sort of general comment. Of course, transport has devolved to Scotland. So from a sort of decision-making, planning standpoint, Transport Scotland can decide for themselves what they choose to do. That could be at odds with the direction of travel that the English government or the Welsh government is going. I'm not to say that it absolutely is, but that's just the nature of the beast when it comes to how transport decision-making planning has been devolved.
Sean, very briefly, but please come in, and then we're going to go to a break, and then we'll come back at 12 minutes past 11.
Yes, great. To answer that question, and Dave Pickles has just said in the chat as well, all back offices should interlope. So one app should eventually become a roaming app to use across all existing apps. That is what's happening in the UK. But of course, all public facing, so a non-gated entry car park that is 8 kilowatts and higher, will have a payment terminal. So that will provide you the option to have a card present solution. And that's legislation in the UK, or especially in England, and will obviously extend further to Scotland in some point in the near future.
Brilliant. And once you know, please can I ask everybody to come back at 12 minutes past, and please have a look in the chat while you grab a tea or whatever as well. Thank you so much. Lovely to see you all and engaging so wonderfully. Thank you. See you at 12 minutes past 11. Thank you. Right, everybody. We're going to come back on. Well, it's great to see the conversations flowing in the chat. And I'm sorry, Gemma, if you can't get into the chat. What we'll try and do is I'll send you an email afterwards with all the chat in there. So you'll at least be able to see some of the comments and be able to reflect on some of those. And by the way, Gemma, it's great to see that Ushdeen Robertson is now the chair of High Trans. I've just read that in the social media in the last couple of days. So we've got an islander. For those of you in the room who may not be aware, but Gemma now has a chair. Ushdeen Robertson, a US councillor and chair of the infrastructure committee, I think, of the local authority here. We also have colleagues from Colin and Shear on the call today as well, and perhaps they might want to say hello in the chat, and maybe they can respond to some of the points that are being raised as well. Okay, I'm being a terrible chair and I'm rambling on, so that's because I've had too much tea and a cigarette during that break, and so I need to now move swiftly on, please, to Ian McLeod from the Energy Savings Trust, who has helpfully already put a link to his fund in the chat. But Ian, the floor is yours. Please do educate us on the grant proposal that you have.
Very happy to do so. Thanks, Brian. Good morning. I'll start by trying to just share my screen, which looks like I am. Yeah, cool. Let me know if you can't see that or if it's the wrong screen. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Really good to be here with you today, and really interesting to hear all the discussions so far. I'm Ian McLeod. I'm a technical manager in the transport team at Energy Saving Trust, and I'm here today to talk about our Rural and Island Infrastructure Fund. So I'll kick things off and just give a little introduction to Energy Saving Trust as is standard, and then I'll sort of set the scene for the Rural and Island Infrastructure Fund, which actually some of the other speakers have already kind of touched on that, so I'll be retreading some ground there, so I'll move quite quickly over that to get to the actual fund itself. So what the fund is, who is eligible for it, what technologies we can fund, and also just kind of quickly run through. So I think someone's got their microphone not muted. Someone mute that maybe. All right. Thank you. And then finally just quickly run through what is involved in the application. But I'll be quite brief with that because obviously it's more in depth than you'll be thanking me to go into it just for a brief presentation. So yeah, to start with, Energy Saving Trust. We are an independent organisation working to address the climate emergency. We're a respected and trusted voice in energy efficiency and clean energy solutions, continue to work towards a smart, decarbonised and decentralised energy system. We empower millions of households every year to make better energy choices, deliver transformative energy programs working with governments, and support businesses with energy efficiency strategies, research, assurance and communications, enabling them to play their part in building a sustainable future. And we're really involved kind of across the sustainability industry in both Scotland, Scotland and England, Wales, and even Northern Ireland. We have a lot of work in renewable energy, in community energy, fuel poverty. We deliver huge amounts of advice. And I'm coming to you today, obviously, from the transport team, which we have, where we've predominantly been kind of involved in the promotion of electric vehicles. We have touched on some other things like active travel and mobility hubs, things like that over the years, low carbon buses, electric buses, things like that. But a big part of it's been sort of supporting the rollout of public charging infrastructure. So that's kind of what I'm here to talk about with today, this latest program, which is the Rural and Island Infrastructure Fund, which is aimed at boosting EV charging infrastructure in rural and island areas. Obviously left a word out there. So yeah, just the background to this, as I was saying. So previously, as people will be very well aware, the Scottish Government was funding the Charge Place Scotland network, which up until really relatively recently was responsible for the vast majority of public charging across Scotland. Now the Scottish Government is looking to sort of step back from their role in that and look much more for the private sector to take a lead. And as part of that, that means that Charge Place Scotland is being transitioned away to these private sector networks, as Gemma and Alex, I think, both mentioned. To enable this, there is a fund that has been made available in the EV Infrastructure Fund, which Gemma spoke about quite a bit about the funding that's been awarded through that. So that's a £30 million fund that's being used to leverage in private sector funding across the whole of Scotland, just really helping to ensure that we build up that comprehensive, robust public charging network through this kind of public and private sector type partnership. However, there was a recognition from Transport Scotland that being private sector led, i.e. profit led, there is going to be it's going to struggle to be really comprehensive. There is this acknowledgement that there'll be areas where the private sector, without enough incentive to do so, is not going to really pick that up. And so that's kind of where the Rural and Island Infrastructure Fund comes in. It's all about targeting those networks that the private sector acting alone is unlikely to fill. I think the reason it's rural and island is these areas are, as you will likely know well, these are often left behind. And from the perspective, if you are the operator of a private sector network, then you obviously will look at where you're going to see the most traffic. And the rural and island areas, as well as having fewer vehicles across a certain area, there's also typically a higher instance of people who have off-street parking available, and these groups are going to be less likely to make use of public charging. So they sort of the overall throughput of potential traffic that they can see is likely lower, which further reduces the incentive for them to invest in these areas. However, if those public networks aren't in place, obviously that means that you're not going to see the same transition over to electric that you will in other areas, which is particularly unfortunate, I think, for island areas, because in many ways islands are very well suited, as again you'll likely all be aware, for electric vehicles in some ways. For instance, the fact that electric vehicles excuse me, the range has obviously grown a lot over the years, but there's still sort of longer journeys which they'll struggle to go without having to charge up. However, in the islands, I imagine these journeys are much less frequent. And furthermore, the fact that, as I said before, more people have off-street parking available does enable them to rely on home charging, and they don't have to pay the higher rates that you tend to on public chargers. So there is a real space there for electric vehicles. It's just that there is still that requirement for the public network to give the people that confidence, and for those who don't have off-street parking, to make that transition. So it's just about making sure that this does actually happen. So, and it's in line as well with this commitment to introducing the 24,000 further public charge points. So just in terms of the eligibility for the fund, we are available. The funding is available for landowning organisations or for charge point operators who are acting on behalf of the landowner or with permission to utilise land from the owner. And just sort of in points of definition, the applicant would make the application and is the main point of contact, and the grantee would be the recipient of the grant funds. And those can be the same organisations. And key here is just that local authorities are not eligible to apply for the fund. Which is why I think Alex said earlier that it was public sector bodies, but in fact other public sector bodies are able to apply. So just be local authorities really. And the reason for that is because this is kind of acting as a complement to the EV Infrastructure Fund, which was targeted exclusively at local authorities. So it's just to make sure that this is kind of being done fairly. And we'll just bring your attention. So I've included some imagery with the slides, which is partly just to kind of give them spice them up a little bit, because otherwise quite dry. But also this one and the previous one, which I'll just scroll back to. These are so this is a poster, and the one before this is a flyer, which are just about promoting the fund. And key, obviously, to the success of the program is to get it out there. And so if you are able, if you have like a community space or something like that, or you're just likely to be mixing in spaces where you're able to sort of spread the word about this, and you think it would be beneficial to have a poster or to have flyers that make people aware that you can pass out, then please do get in touch with us, and we can see about potentially sending some out to you that you can use to help spread the word. Because it's really key that we spread this word to make sure that we are getting into the right locations. Because one slight drawback of the way this fund operates is, of course, has to be reactive rather than proactive. So Alex spoke about some charge points that were going in that weren't really in optimal locations, but ultimately we can only fund in areas that actually spaces that actually come to us and say they want to host them. So, and we do need to make sure that we can get as much funding out the door as possible while it's live. So does that mean that all the projects that we fund will be absolutely the best? In practice, probably not, but we'll make sure that we are still building up that network of public charging, even if you were able to go anywhere you wanted. We might not be getting everywhere, but hopefully we'll still be getting a lot of really good locations. In terms of eligibility, I mean, it's fairly straightforward for people on the island because they basically have to be on Scottish Island, or I don't know if people will be familiar with the Scottish government's urban rural, which I find incredibly difficult to say, classification scale, which is where areas are marked on a scale of 1 to 8 according to how rural they are. You can Google that and you can find it, but it's kind of a moot point for yourselves because if you're an island, you're automatically eligible. And that's in recognition how the islands are often particularly left behind, and the added challenge of the island, which is part of the increased fuel poverty, you say, and some of the extra expenses that are faced for running infrastructure in the island, maintaining infrastructure in the islands, and also just continue to maintain the vehicles, which sometimes obviously have to be taken to mainland Scotland to keep them serviced, which is far from ideal. So they have to be publicly accessible because it's part of building up the public network. And the possibly challenging part is they need to be completed and claimed for by 31st March 2026. So recognize that is quite short timescales for anyone who's maybe just now thinking about doing this. So if you are interested, I put the link in the chat. I'll put it in again after this, after I'm finished speaking. But just really to stress that it's important that people do get moving on this as quickly as possible, because funding is offered in a first come first served basis, and just to stress again that installs on local authority land, as well as local authorities not being eligible to apply on local authority land, are not eligible, but any other areas we can consider. Technology-wise, there are thresholds for each one. These are, we've kind of did some research on these, and we have a lot of experience ourselves in delivering this kind of funding. We think these should hopefully capture to ensure that basically the projects discussed here are fully funded, and that was allowing kind of a likely uplift for instance, really remote and island areas where there's the added cost of installers, etc., having to travel to get there. So I won't run through them all. You can see them there, and they're also linked to on the website. But basically, it's the full range of slow charging up to really high power fast charging that we were looking to put in. There was the recognition that because of this sort of the timescales that are quite constraining on this, that any project that involved the need for a DNO upgrade, as likely any that's above sort of really a 22 kilowatt may well be faced with, particularly in the island areas, that they may not be able to get those works completed in time. So what we've done is we've included the option of what we're classing as innovative projects, which combine charge points with energy storage alone, or energy storage with energy generation, that energy generation being solar PV. And the logic here is if you need to pay for a expansion of your connection or new connection to enable you to have the capacity to put in these higher power charge points, if you have energy storage on site, that can help to reduce the peaks that you're having to see there. It can just basically help kind of curtail that slightly, and that might be enough to either reduce the overall energy connection size of the DNO connection that you need, or perhaps to forgo it altogether, which has the benefit of maybe allowing you to get the projects done more quickly. So that's kind of what we're hoping for there. But you can find more details on all of this in our terms and conditions, which if this is of interest, then I would encourage you to read through those. And as I say, those will be linked to, you can get those through our website. In terms of us approving the projects, so it's we do need to make sure that they do meet certain standards. So we have several criteria for determining those, and we have a small team here accompanied alongside a sort of software solution which we use for assessing each site, just to make sure that they're likely to provide some value to the public network before we fund. So we're not able to just fund anything that comes in. We do want to make sure that there is a certain standard that we're maintaining for the public network. Though again, we do need to also make sure we're getting as much of that funding spent before the deadline. In terms of the application, so obviously you can get to the form through the website. Please note it's done via the Questback software platform form. I'm not sure if people will be familiar with that, but just to note that progress can't be saved in that. So make sure ideally you have as much there for that you need to progress when you start, because you won't be able to restart. And before we can issue the grant offer letter, just to outline what we need from you, we need the project planner description, quote for the works, and evidence of the agreement between the CPO and the landowning organisation, both about the sort of what the setup is going to be in terms of hosting the infrastructure, and how any kind of tariffs or revenue or profit sharing mechanism will be operated between yourselves. You don't need to have that ready at the application stage, but you will need that before we can issue with the grant offer letter. And again, you can find more information on that and guidance on our website. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It was just a very quick run through, but as I say again, you can access and find more information on our website, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions you may want to ask while I'm here, or if you want to afterwards. Our contact information is on this slide.
Ian, thank you so much. That's extremely helpful. What I propose to do is to move straight on to the next two speakers who offer some potential solutions and capacity to take up the offer from Ian. Ian, whilst these two next presenters are presenting, perhaps you could look in the chat, and you've had a number of questions posed directly to you. I wonder if you wouldn't mind answering those. And then what we can do is bring those into a general discussion after the next two speakers has finished. Great pleasure to introduce Sean Johnston from NIACS. He'll explain who he is and why he's here and what the offer is from him. And then we'll move on to Dave Pickles from Joro.
Great, thanks, Brian, and appreciate obviously the opportunity to be here today. So to everyone, hi, my name is Sean. I am based here in the UK. Please don't let my accent fool you. I have been here for a while, but I work for NIACS Energy, and I'm the UK Sales and Commercial Manager. And what we do is we are the OEM for EV charging on the AC side, as well as we do a lot of the payment processing and the payment mechanisms to enable payments at EV charge points. Also, along with other verticals, such as when you go to your forecourt, you will see our devices on the air-served pumps. Next time you go to a kiddies ride, or if you use a vending machine to buy Coca-Cola, have a look, you'll see one of our payment terminals there. But what does that mean in the grand scheme of things, and obviously why we're here today, is that we as a business have identified a pain point in EV charging, which is the availability for rural communities and outlying areas in the UK to access solutions for EV charging on an end-to-end scale, as I will now show you quickly in a couple of slides what is coming in the future. So just please give me 1 second, I'll share my screen. Okay, so this has been touched on a few times already today, but as we know, the revolution of EV charging and EV vehicles will and rapidly approach everybody and touch everyone in at some point in our lives. What's key to note is what government legislation is going to be coming forward in order to drive the uptake of EV vehicles, both on the 2030 and 2035 ban on non-EV vehicles and new car sales, as well as the hybrid sales in 2035. And of course, this is obviously supported from the mandates by the government in terms of legislature to enforce it upon all manufacturers. So that's kind of the landscape that we face. And what does that mean in terms of the current obstacles that communities such as yours face? So again, touched on a few times today, but the geographical locations and obviously the infrastructure limitations tend to play a large part in decisions for the installation of the large charging points and charge hubs, grid capacity, technical and operational challenges, as well as the uptake and demand. This was touched on a few times earlier as well. The installation of charge points that have little to no uptake, and also is a cost of infrastructure that has no ROI on it and doesn't benefit the community at large, and also means that the infrastructure then becomes dormant and no more relevant. And of course, the other unique nuances that are relevant to communities and outlying areas such as yourselves. So at NIACS, what we've taken upon ourselves is to develop an all-in-one solution for the enablement of the private sector, which we also dub both private and semi-public, which is how can we help support the adoption of EV? What can we provide people who have available space, car parking spaces, communities, businesses that have both the power and demand and the need for EV adoption themselves, but also to provide a community support. As we know, some people live in multi-residential and high-rise buildings or flats or outlying areas. EV charging is a problem. So we have come forward with a solution called a nice all-in-one solution. And what does that entail? And apologies if people do know how EV charging works, but very, very simply put, EV charging is made up of 3 components. You have the hardware, which is the EV charging mechanism itself, the actual charger. You have something called a charge point management system, also commonly known as CPMS. And then you have a payment enablement facility, whether that be via an app, whether that be through a card present solution, or whether that be through fleet vehicle cards, or multiple other prepaid cards available as such. So that encompasses what we call the all-in-one solution and ecosystem. So we understand, as somebody who's in the business, that EV charging and the adoption can sometimes be complex and sometimes isn't as simple as it should be. So how should we go about making that? So what we focus on something called a micro CPO and enablement. Now, micro CPO for us is I am a business owner, or I am somebody who has the ability to facilitate EV charging on my land, on my site, on my property, alongside my current business model. As we know, some amenities have become compulsory now in our lives. If you don't have fast Wi-Fi, if you don't have parking availability, sometimes you are left behind in terms of being a choice of what to put. And it's where tourism and obviously the location of where you are is vitally important to the economy as such. So an all-in-one solution should be able to provide EV charging for those businesses or for local communities that can run itself, that works with localized partners, and provides no hidden costs, transparent fees, as well as easy to install, readily available, and supported.
I think we need more than one.
So if we just touch on the equipment side very quickly from us at NIAX, what we do and what is a solution that we currently take to the market is an AC solution, whether it be on single phase or 3-phase. Single phase limits it to 7 kilowatt charge, and 3-phase can go up to 22 kilowatt charging. We provide both a single and a twin socket solution depending on the available space size and requirement needed site. Is what sets this equipment aside as well, and one of the pain points is with regards to the app usage. So NIAX is completely agnostic, our company, so we work with all CPMS platforms. So we work with the likes of Believe, Zest, ChargeCard, Connected Curb, as well as the more localized and smaller CPOs as well as the independent operators too. And that also means we work with all payment platforms. But one of the regulations that is coming is that every charge point in a public setting or available to the public needs to have a card present solution, which means that people have to have the ability to be able to pay with a physical card or physical interaction for the EV charge. So all our chargers and all these solutions are compliant. And what sets them apart is they can be used today as a ready to install based on the available infrastructure that's currently in the ground. Key distinguishing between AC and DC charging is you tend to have the DC, and I think David from Jara can talk about this more as the installer, is that you would need to have dedicated supply and probably infrastructure upgrades to certain sites, where AC 3-phase or AC single phase, depending on the available supply, can be a plug and play solution ready to operate today. Based on location too, chargers can be both 4G, Wi-Fi, Ethernet enabled, so it always ensures that there's some form of communication based on what available networks there are. Again, this is just more on the technical side of what a solution would look like from our side. And again, we can either have the twin socket or single socket with the embedded payment terminal. So charge point management system is very, very simple. It basically allows you to operate the charger, the communication side. It allows you to have full visibility and gives you control of the charge points. So that means you're able to set your own tariffs based on your own pricing that you receive from your energy supplier. It allows you to configure how and it would be used, so different pricing tiers and levels. So if you have a community that uses a community car park, residents can receive a certain tier pricing versus people who are visiting from a tourism who would have to use a surcharge if you would like. the reason this exists and gives you full optimization and control of your charge point in terms of operational efficiency, as well as making it user-friendly. And then payment solutions. So as I've mentioned, we use a card present solution that negates a lot of pain points in terms of having to download an app, spend 10 minutes of faffing around and putting in credit card details and signing up for more marketing. It's a very familiar setup, almost in a vending space. People arrive to a charge point, they see the price point, they present their card, they pay for what they use, and away they go. And all those monies that is generated will be settled either to the CPO that is either managing the car park or the charger themselves, or will be direct to a business. So if you are a business owner and you wish to have a charging on private land, this can be set up in such a way that you receive the full revenue of those charge points to obviously help facilitate the upkeep management and also create an additional revenue to your business if need be. And this is just some general installation that we have currently in public. So the solutions, as you can see, can be a wall mounted or a pillar mounted solution. They are rated to work at minus 25 degrees of snow. The top left one is currently what we have in Finland as well. So they are tried and tested. As I know, it can be a little bit cold in the outer regions of Scotland. So we go back. We have restaurants here as well as available parking spaces. But essentially, this is an area and avenue we believe would help address the pain points of EV adoption in outlying areas. You can see here we've got generalized car parks. We've got usage of spaces that are normally dormant. So i.e. you have a golf course that have put in charge points here to obviously support the local community as well as the businesses that require EV adoption. But instead of there being an issue of trying to always rely on large charging points, charging hubs, we believe that this is a way forward in which we can have a better adoption at a better pricing point, provide a service for the entire community to be able to use EV charging for the EV needs, and also enable that there is a beginning groundwork for EV adoption moving forward. And then I know we touched on this, and this is just a little success story I like to talk about. So that's in Shaftesbury today. This was a local community that had a car park that they wished to open up. So they went for an adoption of our EV chargers because it's also the rate of charge. So people would park up in this car park, they would go visit family and friends or make use of the local community high streets. But of course, it gives them enough time to charge their car at a reasonable price, over the 2 to 3 hour stay that they would be there as well.
I'll ask you to finish up then. Brilliant.
Yes.
Fantastic. And please,
Perfect.
there's some questions in there, Sean, coming to you already. I'll ask Dave Pickles from Joro to come in now, and then we'll have a little bit more of an open forum. But I'm grateful, Sean, for your generosity of your time there. Over to you, Dave.
Great, thanks, Brian. Let's just try and get this window shared. Hopefully you can see that okay. Let me know. Yeah, have you got that, Brian? Oh, thumbs up. Good.
Yeah, you've got 10 minutes, so
well, I was going to say the good news is everybody's done half my presentation already, so I'll not repeat too much. And I know some of the people on the call. So what I'll do is make it really relevant to the audience, hopefully. Very quick background. We've been going 11 years, focused purely on EV charging in Scotland with over 5,500 installations done. We're completely agnostic from all hardware, back office, and some of the billing methods that have been mentioned. And we really focus on just fit for purpose. So I'm very biased to the Western Isles because my in-laws are from South Uist. So they're a really great way to ruin a view is to stick my cars over the years that we've made the EV trips in. And it has got very, very easy. My first Nissan Leaf only did 60 miles on a good day, which was very stressful for the marriage on the way up from central Scotland. It's now done in one charge stop while we're there. Happy to send this presentation out after, so I'll not go into the detail. Sean raised a couple of things that is really relevant before people make this more complicated than it needs to be. We make sure the charge point is relative to the amount of parking and dwell time that the drivers are going to be using. So if you've got guest house with or small B&B, hotel, hospitality, and most of the users may be charging overnight or leaving that car for a number of days locally, you don't need DC rapid chargers, but there's always a place for different levels of charge point, and they come with a different legislation and guidance. People tend to ask for the big numbers, especially those who don't drive EVs. Those that do drive EVs realise sometimes actually it's better to leave that car for 4 hours rather than rushing back, because there's a 45-minute limit on when you can leave the car in Dingwall, like I always forget. So it's just right charger, right place is what we focus on. The charge points themselves have come drastically down in cost depending on the usage, but there are things that are relevant that make them a little bit different from standard charge points, principally if you involve billing. So if you're going to give away the charge points, even free charge points needs to have the ability in future to have what's called accurate metering effectively. We've seen some charge points that are very basic charge points, domestic units put on a wall, and a sort of honor system used, or a flat billing system. The hotel I'm in today just asked me for 30 quid to get a fob. No transaction, it's just literally a flat rate. So there's various ways to do it, but legislation's catching up to try and make it better for the driver, but easier for the owner of the building or the property. People will have seen the high power chargers, again, especially those that don't drive EVs. All they see is the big obvious ones in the petrol forecourts, the EV hubs, or the service stations. You can do this, but the challenge, central Scotland, rural, anywhere in the UK, is grid capacity. So even in quite built up areas, I've got one project in Perth that's waiting for 2.5 years for a sizable grid connection in the middle of an industrial estate. So it's not just rural, and it's allowing us to be quite innovative. So you've got examples like this where Ian referred to some of the innovation projects earlier, where you've got a sizable battery. I say sizable, it's not a big horrible shipping container, it's less than the size of one car parking space, which connects to the existing grid supply, and in this instance is running several DC chargers as a way of maximizing the grid supply now. We've got some clients that are looking to upgrade the supply anyway in those 2 or 3 years ahead, but rather than waiting till perfection, you can do something now, and then grow that from there. Very quickly, we survey not only electrically, we have to survey the property, the vehicles, and the likely users and the owners, and really just guide people through that process. We do power assessments to see what's available right now, rather than assuming you have to bring in a new connection. I think I saw in the chat there was somebody mentioned about doing almost like feasibility studies. We offer that as part of our progress anyway, and most people in this industry should, as part of helping put together grant applications, site drawings, etc. From that, installation begins, onboarding and handover then follows. We've mentioned about power supplies, really, really keen. I've got a couple of organisations up in South Uist who've been told over the years, no, you can't have anything added, you're already at your limit of power. That's factually probably correct, but that does not prevent you adding EV charge points. There are solutions to work within those power usages as well, because when the kitchens are really busy in a restaurant is probably not when the chargers are needed. Out of those hours, there's some options there. We also talk about future proofing. So we don't want to go to all this effort just because there's a fairly short-term fund for you to realise in 3 years' time, well, we have to dig up the road again. So we make sure that we do a lot of the passive infrastructure in place that's feasible without putting a big bill or running costs on the owner. But you can do a lot of passive infrastructure to save costs in future without spending too much right now. So we talk about that process as well. Regulations and guidelines, there was concerns about some of the local qualifications or ability. We're really, really keen to work with local organisations, local people, local contractors for day 2 onwards, so for that support and maintenance and ongoing. We work with a lot of contractors there beyond the day of install, and provide support for local contractors as well, who are maybe not doing EV charging every single day of the week like we are, that are doing 1 or 2 projects and can go down the wrong path, not because of poor choice or skill, just experience and knowledge of what is right and what is out there. Accessibility should be mentioned. When you've got a blank slate and you haven't installed anything, now's the time to kind of plan for that, and you can consider best practice rather than the legislation. And I managed to find some slides that hopefully Sean's not too upset with in terms of the NIAX terminals. You've got contactless out there, you've got the RFID card fob arrangements that you've seen for a lot of the AC chargers. Everything works for an app, and some will work on contactless as well, depending on the the need and the suitability for that. And again, we can kind of advise on what's best. I get asked about payment a lot when people are not asking whether they should put an EV charger in. Most people ask how on earth it works and how they don't add administration burden for the person that's running that guest house, running that small museum, cafe, whatever. These people are not trained in supporting EV drivers. So how do we make it straightforward? But billing is relatively simple. You create a payment as an individual driver, and then your app, your card should be interoperable with whatever charge point that you put in. Whoever's paying the electricity bill that charge point's connected to is who gets the funds. Really simple. The electricity bill's always covered in advance of your bill coming in. How much you'd set that rate is down to yourself in terms of your own costs and/or what you're willing to offer drivers. Service and support and maintenance, as I believe Jem and others have covered already, has kind of just been not as focused as it should have been over the years, but is night and day now. Hardware's got a lot more durable. Some of the charge points I'm showing up here are aluminium. Those are the ones I'm putting out in the exposed coastal areas, not the steel coated ones or steel ones. But the fact that all charge points are online 24/7 and monitored, problems are kind of proactively dealt with before they become service issues and go offline completely. Unlike others, we only install things that we get service and maintenance agreements arranged. So either by ourselves and/or you have an agreement in place with a local contractor needs to be in place so that we know that all stakeholders effectively are making sure that charge point's reliable for the drivers. Brian, I think hopefully I caught up in time from it. Just conscious of there's probably some questions and things that we can go through, and I'm more than happy for the slides to be shared out afterwards rather than going into too much detail at this stage.
Well, that's fantastic, and I appreciate you plowing on really quickly there, but I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity to take any questions. So I'll now open it to the floor for people to ask any direct questions to either the funder or potential funder or either of the two operators that are on the call. And in fact, I know that Rupert has already mentioned another company that does offer solutions, which both Dave and Sean has talked about as well. So I'll open it to the floor. Has anyone got any questions that they haven't already asked in the chat, or if they want to elaborate on one of the questions that they've asked in the chat already?
I'll jump in with one, Brian, if there's nobody there. One of the concerns is the timeline of the application process specific to the EV Rural Fund. So myself and a couple of others have created room in the timeline in order to deliver the project. So I think there was some hesitation that some past projects have taken months and months and months to deliver. We are able to certainly to install well before the March kind of deadline to quite a considerable number. And unlike there being like one or two eligible companies, there's several that are able to take this kind of forward. And I know Ian and the team are pretty keen to work pretty efficiently on the applications. So yeah, what we don't want is people assuming that because the last fund for ChargePlay Scotland 3-4 years ago took 6 months to go through, not to apply, because you find in a lot of examples, especially AC charging, can be installed. There's no planning, very little engagement works. It can be delivered pretty quickly. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely the case. We've already had some. I think they're in the ground. For that applied just a couple of months ago. So yeah, thanks for that, David.
Alex, please come in.
Yeah, just to kind of expand a little bit, I suppose, on the eligibility rules around the infrastructure fund. And this is a conversation I've had with Dave and a number of others, Transport Scotland directly. And it really comes down to the what is deemed to be sufficient usage of a charge point to qualify it for the fund. The point I'd raised, and I made it earlier on, in this session, is the fact that there are a lot of B&B self-catering owners and so forth that may or may not be eligible. And it just speaks to the fact that, and Dave just made this point, that it's a lot faster to get an AC charge point in place. but that has to be balanced against which individual properties, locations are actually eligible, i.e., how much usage is actually going to be derived or generated from each particular location. And that might well mean that some locations that could be promising candidates aren't necessarily eligible for that, such as self-catering properties, because, as I said earlier, you will have people who are charging overnight there, but they're just being used by, an individual occupant for a period of days, so forth. So they're not necessarily going to meet that eligibility criteria. So it's just I guess you want to use Ian as well, just to make sure that if there's any sort of grey area that isn't 100%, 110% clear to those who are thinking of applying, that is addressed, because it's something that we've picked up, since we started chatting to Transport Scotland about the fund and eligibility rules.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I mean,
Alex.
shall I respond
on,
to that,
yeah.
Brian? Yeah. In terms of what's going to get public use, ultimately that's very subjective. It's very difficult for us to make that judgment. I mean, that's why we've procured an actual sort of specialized tool that is designed to make that assessment. But even that tool, that on its own isn't enough. We also have myself and a colleague in the team who have quite a bit of sort of experience in the sector to go in there and look more closely and try to make the call. I mean, ultimately, it's about, it needs to deliver something that provides some benefit to the public network, and I emphasize like the kind of public network there. So, for instance, certainly we look favourable on things like hotels and stuff like that. In the case of like a B&B, or like where it's just one guest house on its own, I think we're slightly leery of just fully funding a guest house for a charge point that is likely to only be used by its guests. I mean, not only that, but like, you can imagine if you were staying at a guest house and someone else came up and started using your charge point, you probably wouldn't react positively to that. So I mean, that's one where we kind of look at it and say, okay, is this actually building up the public network, or is it just providing this one guest house with a charge point for its guests? And probably those guests aren't even going to do a particularly high mileage, because when you come and stay at a guest house, you're there for several days, but you're probably not driving hundreds of miles over that time, generally speaking. So I mean, that's just to address that one particular example that you've given. I mean, however, the priority, like, Transport Scotland are very keen to get, as much for this funding out the door as possible. So as much as possible, they're looking to fund ones where we can make that strong case. So the message we're putting out, if you're not sure, either just apply or ask us, and we'll be happy to advise, either by approving or rejecting the applications. Far more of the former as the case is, or just by responding to your query directly. So yeah, I hope that kind of addresses that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Please come in.
Yeah, so two very clear points on that is that absolutely make the most of the funding available, but it is the short-term thing, and it's not eligible for all, and that's okay. Some of the guest houses that we have as clients are choosing charge points that are just for those guest houses, and the costs are 50% of a similar AC charge point that needs to meet the full public charging regulations. So it's something to bear in mind that if you're not eligible for the funding and you want to put charging in at your guest house, it's not thousands of pounds to do so. And there was one point in the chat there about not covering costs. So there's two costs. There's the upfront initial day one cost of installing. What seems to be a lot of concern out there is the operating costs beyond that. When you're looking at small scale sort of hospitality versus a high use public charging, there really should be no OPEX costs or hugely little, i.e. if you've got a guest house situation, if nobody's using the charge point, there should be no cost. There are business models out there that will charge a monthly annual fee regardless of use, but we don't use them for very low use sites. There are fleet customers of ours or hospitality sites that have 12 sites. They need a more advanced back office, and that comes with a more advanced cost. So it's not one rule for all. So again, just thinking about what we call OPEX costs, the monthly daily costs, or something to bear in mind in terms of the charge point. But for low use sites, it shouldn't cost you anything on a monthly basis to have that charge point. Higher use sites, then yes, there is some overhead and fees. There's also funders out there that will lease and fund charge points out with this fund. on a case-by-case basis in terms of what the applicant is. So there is other options other than the fund.
Thank you. Come in then, Sean. That would be great.
Great, thank you. And just so everyone, I'm completely in line with exactly what David said. It is a case-by-case, use-by-use basis, so a lot of these can be built out to what you require. Just answering a question from Rupert Marshall with regards to how many of our charges are currently in the Western Isles. None are present, but the inquiries that were driven from the Isles and the Hebrides led obviously Brian to reaching out to us to obviously address everybody at large here. But we have got installations along the coast of Cornwall, Pembrokeshire in Wales, in Norfolk, and also heading towards York as well. So a lot of the outlying areas tend to be where we're getting a lot of an uptake from. And then just for everybody's benefit and education, so in a scenario, we would work with partners like Dave from Jaro, who would be the installation arm while we provide all that, as we touched on, the hardware and software, but we would work collaboratively as a unit to ensure that you have the best solution delivered to you for your use case and supported. So we would give them the enablement and support from our side, and they would obviously deliver it for to you.
Thank you. That comes neatly on. Kirsty's probably pulling her hair out because I've allowed the schedule to go completely off the case. But we're now going to go on to a sort of an open discussion around some of the building the local capacity. And Sean's last point there comes into one of the questions that Kirsty is going to pose on the Mentimeter, which is, would the community benefit from a how-to guide to install EV charge points? So I don't know if that's already in right, Kirsty's indicating yes, it is. I'd like your thoughts. Please pop an answer into that, and we'll collate those as we go. And then another question: would our islands benefit from increased local installation of charge points? I saw that Ian, you posted about the domestic chargers and the people who are competent to install them, and therefore get a grant towards the installation of domestic chargers. And there are 3 in the Western Isles. And that's Aces Electrical, Lewis Builders, and West Coast Energy, or John Daniel Peterana, for those of you in Newest and Barra, you'll know him via that. But there is an issue with, we need to get more independent sparkies trained. The UHI Northwestern Hebrides, University of Highlands and Islands Northwestern Hebrides Stornoway office has a electric vehicle charge place training centre, and they also have courses that they run. They require you to pay, I think it's £380. We as a climate hub would be prepared to sponsor independent sparkies to pay their fees so that we boost the capacity in the local community to go and fix these things. So I've tried to have that conversation with UHI. Unfortunately, they're not on the call today, but it's something that we will pursue going into the future. I mean, I don't believe that this fund that Ian's running at the moment will stop at the end of March and won't come back as another iteration at some point later on. So I kind of think we have to be prepared for future pots of funding here. So please, if you can answer those questions, and perhaps I'll pose this question now. Would our islands benefit from local management and maintenance of public charge points? And does anybody in the call have any thoughts on that? Dave, please come in.
Yes. Short answer. We many years ago, we looked at trying to service the islands for the obvious reasons of half my family asking why we weren't doing charge points over there. But the issues that we had in getting local electricians, local companies to be able to respond quick enough to what are called SLAs, i.e. answer the phone quick enough and be reliable, in the real world was a real challenge. Orkney was underserved for quite some time. And being very transparent, it was cheaper for us to send our own electricians from Glasgow for 2 weeks than it was to hire and contract the local staff. Now, I'm going back 8-9 years, certainly pre-COVID. We would massively encourage any more local support in terms of trained qualified, but they do need to be trained and qualified. We get lots of skilled electricians that can absolutely safely wire and inspect the charge point, But for the manufacturer maintain warranty, for safety, and I don't want to be too dooms gloom about health and safety, but if they've not been on a recognised course, it's very difficult for companies, and we're a small company, it's very difficult for small companies for us to contract those works out. And for faster response, we want people local. It's absolute, a non-starter for us to respond to a 4-hour response if we don't have somebody local. So again, part of my visit that I'm doing this week up to the islands is to hopefully engage a couple of more local people. So yeah, I think having local support is a huge boost for everybody, both public and non-public charge points.
Thank you, Alex.
Probably a question back to Dave, actually, just with regards to that kind of localization of skills. Given the fact that there'll be a range of different hardware OEMs, if you are a local person, you either skilled or could be trained up to maintain or maintain those charge points. What is the ask if, from a training standpoint, Dave, if you might have to have responsibility and knowledge about hardware from a variety of OEMs?
Yeah, and I think that's why we exist at the minute, is to kind of simplify all of the different variations between brands and quirks and features of back offices, etc., to basically issue that job card in simple language for us to say, this is what's been identified. We can give local electricians that support rather than just going, there's a red light on it. Good luck, which is how some of the contractors have been treated before when it comes to fixing problems. So you need some IT support. 90% of our issues and service calls are IT related, not electrically related to those charge points. So some of the training and some of the capability needs to be an electrician that's not scared of a laptop sometimes. And that's some of the additional support that they don't necessarily give you when you're trained to be an electric vehicle charge point installer. IT is not focused upon enough, so we're having to do that. So not necessarily trained per brand, we can cover that. It's more being able to be flexible in terms of being IT aware and as well as the normal electrical safety and qualifications.
Gemma, please come in.
I was just going to add that I think, Alex, that would be a really good thing to make more transparent. I think it's quite hard to understand what training is required and how that would happen for different OEMs and things. And certainly from my point of view, with one predominant supplier and one person who could distribute parts in the past, there are challenges to getting local installation companies on board. So to understand that training requirement would be really helpful.
Thank you. I should say one of the reasons for asking Sean along was because he has a piece of equipment that any Sparky should be able to maintain, and the actual fixing of the kit and the installing of it can be done by single person Sparkies, that are, as long as they've been trained at UHI. And Shona asked the question, would the Climate Hub consider funding, just to confirm, and I'll quote her, would we consider funding the local electricians to be trained up? Yes, independent one-person Sparkies, absolutely, we'd be prepared to pay for their training fee on the basis that it benefits the hive. We all benefit as a community by having more of these people trained. That doesn't overcome some of the issues with the equipment, like Dave has mentioned and Gemma has mentioned, where you've got to have access to back office systems and a range of other things. We can't cope with that. That's not our role at the moment. But what we can do is, for my concern going forwards is this big energy transition. A lot of the electrical companies are going to be employed solely to start building substations and doing a whole range of other things connected to the offshore wind farms and onshore wind farms that are going to be developed. And we need to increase the pool of local electricians that can be able to maintain these things. Otherwise, we're going to find a situation where we have to rely upon, back in the days of someone coming off a boat to come and fix a charger. Keith, come in.
Hello, Keith Morrison from We Studio here up in Ness, and I am maybe my experience would be good to let you know how it's like for a business like me. I have a question for Ian McLeod, I'm guessing. So the funding to get these charge points put in just now is to be completed and claimed by the 31st of March. Now, I'm kind of sitting pretty here where I've got a car park outside the studio. I've got solar panels on the roof and I've got accommodation here. So it's a residential studio. So people come and sleep here. Plus, we're right at the main road. So we have traffic of people going past Ness. So we seem to be a prime candidate for this. The problem I have is for me still there's a knowledge gap between getting the funding and all the steps in between. And I know probably the first step would be to get in touch with an installer, but I'm pretty sure as soon as I phone them, they won't really know about the fund. They won't really know about which chargers to put in and who needs to look after that, if anyone needs to look after that. Is there issues with the fuse box that's in here? Is there issues with who digs up the road to put, or the ground to put the cables in? There's just, if we get in touch with the electricity people, just to see if we're allowed to use that kind of power. It just seems like there's a lot of stuff I wouldn't know where to start in the project plan or evidences of agreement or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Keith. That's really helpful kind of feedback. I think you know, we're a relatively small team, and we're you know, the financial realities of this is we need to get a lot of charge points projects through the door in a very short amount of time, which unfortunately doesn't leave us a huge amount of time to kind of provide the guidance that I think, you know, some of the projects such as the, you know, yourself would ideally be getting. I mean, there is on our website we do have links to the terms and conditions and the application guidance and stuff, which is hopefully of some help in terms of the sort of more granular stuff, like when you're talking about dealing with the planning permission with the local council, if there are like issues with having to do trenching through roads or something like that. That's something we're, you know, we would just have to point you towards your local council. Hopefully someone there can pick that up. But then obviously there is the challenge in terms of the time that is likely to take. And yeah, the point, very valid point that you make about the installers. I mean, I think that is something we're grappling with, and that's why, you know, I'm here, and what we're trying to promote this is to just make sure there is that kind of awareness, because yeah, if there's just a very limited number of installers who are actually operating on your island who maybe haven't become fully aware of this funding. I mean, we are, you know, we do try to promote it, but it doesn't reach everyone. Then that does make it more challenging for us. But certainly, if you have someone and you know, you've engaged with them and they are interested in doing the works, but they need more information, then I would encourage you to kind of point them towards us, or, you know, put us in touch with them, and we can hopefully help to kind of move that forward. But you know, it's something we are, as well as trying to administer the fund, we're looking at where it can be improved, and that's definitely something I would take on board, and how we can hopefully set up the appropriate channels for engagement between the installers in the island and then the CPOs who would actually be running or overseeing the charge points.
Anyone want to add anything else on that?
I was just going to jump in. Sorry, I think Brian's kind of disappeared. Just to kind of maybe give you a little bit of reassurance. It builds on what you just said. For you, Keith, for Peter and others who at the start of this journey, and you know, I've mentioned this a few times, but you know, we have the advantage at SRITC. You know, we're agnostic. We don't have any skin in the game in terms of technology and suppliers and so forth. So what we've been doing for a while now is highlighting these concerns directly to Transport Scotland to say that, look, you know, there was a process has been designed. There is a portfolio of support information that's available. However, it isn't necessarily designed as well as it could be for the small business who is very time limited and knowledge poor as well. So I think there is absolutely scope for improvement in that area, and we've made that point very strongly. But that shouldn't negate for the fact that, I'm sure Dave will come in, there are installers out there, there are organisations, if you like today, connect with them, they'll provide the support you need. But the point being, this to a degree is just opportunism. It's just the fact that you've come on this webinar, this session today, that you've been able to connect, which is fantastic, but it shouldn't necessarily need to be that way. And that's the point that I'm making very strongly to Transport Scotland, that we need to be a bit better at recognising that there's a large community of small businesses out there who are interested and potentially, as you say, Keith, have got the right place to install chargers, but need better support, more education in terms of the step-by-step on the journey.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, Keith, you are representing the vast majority of people, so it's not yourself not knowing where to start. And I think, as Alex says, that's the really key thing for us, is to make sure that people know more options to them rather than what they've seen gone before. And I think that's the real challenge for us, is that people have looked at what's been done before and go, well, that's not appropriate for my car park or business or supply.
Yeah.
And unless you're a geek like we are doing it, it's very hard for people to keep up with everything that's there. We've done 20-ton electric trucks for the NHS Glasgow charging on a £900 7-kilowatt charger, whereas an alternative wanted to put in a £75,000 new grid connection because it was a big truck. We went, it only does 12 miles a day. So again, you just need to find some people like ourselves. We're not the only ones. But I think just for the audience, it's really key that we will work with people that are already either started or not yet started. The application process is fairly light to begin with, in terms of enough information for Ian and his team to go, right, this is what we want, this is where things are going, make it easy for us to understand, how many spaces you're looking at, what's the existing power. Most of this can be done remotely, like a Teams call, from there. But what we are very keen to get the message out there is that if you do have a fairly friendly, competent electrical firm that's maybe somebody you would speak to about any electrical thing in the building, they can act as our eyes and ears on the ground sometimes, and we are looking at working with those individuals, not instead of, because we'll do the front and the back end effectively to make sure compliance is done, make sure it offers good value. But we've got people, as I say, that are up in Stornoway and others that are looking to kind of do this and make sure that we're using 25, 26 eyes on EV charging, not what qualified for funding 4 years ago, so that we can make sure and offer. So I think, as I say, reach out to a few of us, so you got some different opinions, but you don't have to wait 3 months until I can get to your studio, which I've been to before, kind of from up there before. You can start the process tomorrow, in terms of how to do that.
Thank you, Dave. Please come in, Gemma.
Thanks. I have a question for Ian, actually. Ian, EST did a really good EV infrastructure guide for, I think, public infrastructure, in people looking at installing public infrastructure. And I just wondered if there was a similar thing available for community or workplace infrastructure.
You're right, Gemma. In fact, I posted a link to it earlier in the chat.
Sorry.
We don't. No, that's please, people, check it out. I think that one's kind of meant to be broad enough that it certainly could apply to community ones. And we don't have a separate one for workplace ones. We do have one that's more about managing fleets, which I think that maybe could link in with what you're describing. But I think the idea is for the public infrastructure one, that hopefully that's broad enough that it could kind of include community stuff. But I can post a link to our fleet one as well, which may be of some use to people.
Thank you. Well, that was I actually asked a question earlier on the Mentimeter, and I think that went on to the chat about would the community benefit from a how-to guide to install EV charge points. This was raised by our colleague Rupert in a recent Climate Hub gathering, where he asked whether we would do one. And I kind of think, it's down to capacity. We could certainly encourage the collaboration to get one done that's pertinent to the local area, and maybe we could commission someone to do it itself. But if people are interested in that, then, and if it does exist already, brilliant. And if it doesn't, let's get one then. So please, if you can, comment on the Mentimeter post on that. The other thing I would say is, I don't know if this is, please, Kirsty, if this has gone into I'll come to you a second, Ian. Has the question gone up about should we conduct a feasibility study, and has anybody responded to that?
Yeah, Brian, we went through them in the previous panel discussion, so they've been
And people
answered.
have put some
Yeah.
comments in. Excellent. Okay. In which case, then you've been asked by Kirsty to answer what should our top three priorities be. Perhaps, Ian, you can give us one of our top three priorities. You come in and please ask your question or raise your point.
Okay, yeah, I was just to say on the EV infrastructure guidance side of things, it's please do let us know what, you know, I've posted the link, well, to both of our guides, and if you have any kind of feedback, I mean, particularly it would be really helpful to have a kind of perspective from the islands of anything you think it's missing or anything that could be improved, and please do let us know, because we're always looking at ways of developing it. In terms of priorities, I mean, I think for me, it's, and probably a lot of people say, it's just tackling the groups who don't have that off-street parking, who are reliant who are wholly reliant on public infrastructure, so not just for their longer journeys, but entirely for being able to make the switch. And it's ways of closing the kind of both the cost and convenience gap for those groups relative to those who can charge at home, have access to cheap off-street tariffs and things, and you know it's just very difficult to kind of compete with that. I think we need to get them to make sure that there is the full transition. I don't know, it's maybe less of an issue on the islands where there's probably a smaller proportion of people who don't have that access, but it's still an issue. I think it's what's holding back, probably the biggest thing holding back the transition generally, I would argue.
Thank you. That's an important and helpful contribution. We're starting to come towards the final furlong. Perhaps, Kirsty, if there's been anything posted in some of the what should our top three priorities be, perhaps you could have a look and see if anyone's put something in and pose it back to everybody in the room, and let's see what people have to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share my screen so everyone can see the comments. Just 1 second. There we go.
Would anyone like to comment on any of the items posted above? If not, I'll pick on one of the comments and ask whoever posed it to say something about it. Perhaps whoever asked the question and put in the brackets, like the Goulson one, would you like to just elaborate or help new potential EV drivers navigate charging? I'm interested in that.
Hello, that's me, Rupert. I was really picking up on the earlier conversation, partly in the chat with Alex, where there does seem to be a disconnect between people who usually charge at home and then travel somewhere and are presented with all of these apps, as was discussed, unaware that there are one app that will cover 20 others and all this sort of thing. And the Goulson point was that Climate Outer Hebrides, as previously organised EV open days to show people what the car, encourage their take up, and were there to be future such open days, how to navigate the charging network might be a useful thing to add in.
I'm grateful, Rupert, as ever, and Sarah will take that point on. She's currently developing our training program that's going to be online as well as in person, and we're going to make that as exciting and as interesting as possible, but with direct real world examples and everything. And I think that can be taken away and looked at as part of our future development of our training program. So I'm grateful. Alex.
Yeah, really just to build on that point, because I've given this a lot of thought in terms of practically speaking, from an educational standpoint, what should our asks be? And I think if we broaden it out beyond just the charging component, but to the fact that we are going to have more people buying EVs as they become cheaper over time, and the fact that it's unfamiliar to them, what scope is there for more general public events, you know, such as maybe the one in Galston is a kind of a little bit of example of that, where either local businesses or local people who are considering buying an EV can come along and have access to experts, have access to those who are actually in the EV market in terms of selling EVs, or those who are actually in the installation of chargers, because perhaps that way you'll build up more confidence within the community holistically in terms of actually buying, driving EVs, but also the bit around charging them as well. Now, appreciate funding might be needed for these type of events, but perhaps is that something we need to look more closely at, particularly for rural and island areas where it's less easy just to pop along to Arnold Clark in Glasgow, you know, and get the education there. It's just not really practical, is it?
I mean, that's a good point. I'll bring you in a second, Sean, but I would say that, I mean, the reason why Galston Estate and us collaborated on that EV roadshow was because we had previously funded the Galston Estate to have a greenhouse gas audit conducted, and the findings from that audit, one of the examples that was within that was that they needed to help reduce emissions of transport in their estate. And they took a very proactive view on this, and they've developed their own climate action plan. And part of that is about making the transition towards electric vehicles. So we were really thrilled to be able to work with the Galston Estate Trust to deliver an EV roadshow where we took our car out across the communities of their estate, and people were able to have a go. We conducted briefing sessions and everything else. However, we did miss a trick there, where, you know, you mentioned about the possibility of working with local businesses throughout the estate there. Now that could be something we could think about, and maybe that could be a next iteration of that. And certainly for other areas around the islands, absolutely we want to conduct that exercise. It's really a question now of the Scottish Government agreeing to funding us for next year as a climate hub. But for those of you around the room who are Climate Hub members, then do please, when we send our first draft of our business case for funding of next year, where we'll input a lot of your suggestions from today into that, we want you to be able to say a comment on that. So there's an opportunity, there'll be opportunities for the next few months to really help develop our next period of activities. Sean, sorry, I'm rambling. You come in.
Not at all, and I think it's a good segue into what I was going to comment on, and I'm sure this might speak to a few of the other participants in the call, is that aside from myself and Nyack being here today just to obviously talk about us and our brand, I think we also want to volunteer ourselves and our skills, knowledge, and expertise as leading industry resources to the likes of for Climate Hebrides who are driving these initiatives. We would, and myself particularly, would be more than happy to be an asset or a resource where we can engage along with to obviously educate both the public in terms of EV adoption, the how-to, the business modeling case, what is ROI and how does it work? Because I'm sure it's similar to maybe David as well. But you know, we come from the industry. I've worked for a manufacturer. I've owned an EV. I now do the financial side. So we would absolutely want to volunteer our resources to help leverage those communities into the understanding of EV and EV adoption, and to the wider climate change for obviously Climate Hebrides. Sorry, the green initiative. So yeah, I think that's what we want to say is we hear for the more wider use case, should we say.
Thank you. That's a very positive and helpful contribution. I mean, we're getting close to the last fence, as it were, and so here's an opportunity for anybody around the room to either pose a question or ask or make a suggestion. Here's your chance to feed in now before I wrap up and we knock it on the head. So I'll open the floor up to anyone to ask a final question or to pose a thought. Okay, well, everyone's gone all shy. There's a first. Usually when you come to any meeting with the islands, you get boom, 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 attacked from all sides. So I think obviously everyone's just thinking about all of the stuff that we've been talking about this morning. There was a heck of a lot going on in this conversation today. And I think I've certainly learned a great deal from this morning and into this afternoon, and I very much appreciate. And someone, do we need to post our presentations into the chat? Someone who can answer that question, please come in. And
if you just email your presentations directly to me, I can disseminate them to all the attendees today in a follow-up email.
Thank you. David, please come in. It'd be lovely to hear from you.
Fundamentally, we need more electric vehicles on the road to make all this enthusiasm be seen to work. Does anybody have any views on the EV uptake? Because there's lots of enthusiasm, then the subsidies disappeared or reduced. Are we still seeing more EVs on the road? And when finally will they come to the Western Isles?
Okay, yes is the answer. There are more electric vehicles on the road, and I make a point now every time I'm driving around anywhere in my electric vehicle. Well, I know there's two more because I've got one and Climate Hebrides has one. But what I do know is that we are going in to encourage people. I know that Donald, my good dear friend Donald Morrison from Home Energy Scotland is on the call, and we've been going out throughout the summer with our electric car at summer events where members of the public have come up to us and asked us, how does it work? What does that, and all of the questions you'd expect them to ask. We're then saying to them, okay, if you want an interest-free loan from the Scottish government to get a second-hand EV, there is the guy who can help you with that. Go and speak to Donald. So we've been collaborating well on that. In terms of the numbers by the islands, the only source I can find of where that we actually find out how many people have registered is actually from Parliament, where they have a web page that shows the number of EV registrations, and it's broken down by local authority. We are studying those numbers. Anecdotally, I will say I see more green squares on number plates in the islands now than I've ever seen before, and everywhere I go, I see more of them. And I do know that I now have to sometimes wait to get the car that I'm in onto a charger because somebody else is already on it. And so there is a greater take up. Thoroughly, there's a flurry of hands. So let's get on to others then. I don't know if that's answered your question, David, but I'm happy to talk to you again very soon. Please, let's catch up. Dave Pickles, over to you.
Yeah, so there's exactly what you just said, Brian. I have to compete for some of the charges when I visit now, which I never used to. There are a lot more. Also, if it wasn't for the little green box, a lot of the new brands of brands of cars, model of cars, don't look that odd anymore, or aren't always that unusual brands. So sometimes they go under the radar. I think I've raised it in the chat as well that the service and maintenance of the vehicles themselves, I see as a bigger challenge than the charge points, controversially enough, because unless you give the certainty to those buying used cars that now offer amazing value, if you don't have that service and maintenance side of things, it can put people off deciding whether to buy that, fund it, finance it, whatever. Another thing that gets lost is for local businesses, if they don't have the confidence, then they don't put the small electric van on the road. But the tourism thing is quite big as well. The hire companies are being pressured to put those EVs on the road, but without the handover to and for the drivers to know that where their destination charging goes. And I think that's part of the fund as well, is not just thinking about local resident public available charge points. It's the green tourism and being able to charge at your destination is a huge part to get more people driving EVs on the roads themselves locally as well.
Thank you. Over to you, Keith.
Hello. Yeah, another question for Ian McLeod. Sorry for picking on you. This is a really specific one, which you might have an answer to. So I started my business in 2008 as a sole trader. And when I built this new studio, I turned it into a limited company. And I was interested in the electric van loan for business. But when I went to apply, it said that the business had to be 3 years old. But at that time, my new limited company wasn't 3 years old, even though I'd been running the studio since 2008. Just wondering, is there any way around that, or is that like a set thing?
I'm not directly involved in that one, so I can't give you an immediate answer. But I'll drop my email in the chat, and if you want to send me an email, I can make sure that gets to the relevant person in the team.
Thank you. I mean, these obviously there's room for further discussion, but we've run out of time, I'm afraid, and I'm conscious that people have lives and they need to go and do lots of other things. I'm extremely grateful to all of you for being so generous with your time and your inputs into the discussions today. More discussions will continue. I know that Gemma has some more thoughts. The local authority has more thoughts here about, you know, how we maintain some of the public infrastructure, you know, working with colleagues like Dave and Sean and others for the private infrastructure availability in the islands. I know that some of the land trusts are very interested in how they can facilitate the switch of part of the energy transition in their areas. I want to make one final point. People have to drive in our areas, okay? We don't have public transport worth its salt to actively move people around the islands. And people are paying to keep petrol cars on the road that are extremely expensive to run. And if we can facilitate a switch over to cleaner and cheaper to run vehicles, we'll be tackling a poverty issue as well. And not least the air quality issue and health implications of all of the emissions from petrol and diesel cars. So this thing is multifaceted. Climate Hebrides are very keen on working with partners going forwards into helping, you know, solve some of the issues that have been raised today. So thank you all very much. I'm a man of a certain age, so in the words of young Mr. Grace, you've all done very well, and thank you all for participating. Great session, and please do contact me. My name is Brian. I'm brian@climatehebrides.com. You're welcome to pick up with me individually afterwards. We'll make the slides available for those of you who are speakers. Send them on to us. We'll get them out to everybody, and we'll get all of the information from the Mentimeter as well. And if you're all happy for us to share that back with you, we'll do that as well. So thank you so much. Well done.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.